It was a Tuesday morning, and 10 days before it, my first baby had been born in the upstairs room, with only my mother and the midwife there to hear him take his first breath. I was 24 years old, and I had not slept a whole night through since, and my hands still trembled a little when I lifted the coffee pot. The bishop's wife came up the lane in her buggy, while the washwater sat cold in the basin. She sat down at my table, and I poured for her, and she folded both hands around the cup the way a woman does when she means to stay a good while. But she did not drink it. She set it back down, still full, and she stood, and she crossed to the window above my sink, and she drew one finger along the sill, slow, from the one end clear to the other. Then she turned her finger over and looked at the tip of it. The visit was not a visit. I did not yet know what it was. I married Amos the November I turned 22, in a house full of benches and the smell of celery, the way we all do it here. I moved the 2 miles from my father's farm to his, and I thought the whole of my new life would be the two of us, and the seasons, and the ordnung we had both been raised inside. I did not understand, that first married winter, that a wife's kitchen is never only her own. Amos's mother lived down the road, and she came often, and she was kind, and she was watching. She would lift the lid off my kettle, not unkindly, and stir it once, and say nothing, and set the lid back. She would look at how I had hung my husband's shirts, and at the straightness of the part beneath my cap, and at whether my jars stood in even rows on the canning shelf. I thought she was only being a mother to me, teaching me the way she'd been taught, and some of it she was. But there was a measuring in it too, a quiet holding of my days up against her own younger days, and against what a wife in our district was meant to be by now. When the GMA met, and the men came in from unhitching the buggies and the women filled the long tables, I felt eyes move over my baking the way you feel the sun move behind a cloud. In the evenings, I would go over my day in my mind the way you'd check stitches for a dropped one. Had I got the wash white enough? Had the bread risen even? Had I spoken too much when the older women were speaking? I began to keep my house a little tighter, a little more careful, without ever deciding to. That is how it starts. Not with a rule you can point to, but with a wanting to be found good. I told myself every young wife feels this. I did not have a word for it yet. The visits were the thing I noticed, once I began to notice. A woman would come by of a morning, Mary from the next farm, or one of the deacon's daughters, and she would sit a spell and drink her coffee and speak of the weather and the price of feed. And her eyes, all the while, would go around my kitchen, to the floor, to the wood stove and whether it was blacked, to the dish towels, out the back door to the garden, where she could count my rows of beans and see plain whether the weeds had got ahead of me. It was never said. That was the whole of it. It was never once said. But I came to know that by Monday noon, my wash had best be out on the line, snapping white in the wind, because a line still empty on a Monday was a thing the women saw from the road as their buggies went past. And I came to know that a wife should be ready, always, for her turn to host the GMA in her own home, the benches, the food after, the floors clean enough to seat the whole church. Each call, on its own, was a small thing. A woman drinking coffee, a glance at a windowsill. It was only when they were laid end to end that they made a shape. But I did not lay them end to end, not then. Each one felt to me like weather, something that simply passed over and was gone. I would wake before Amos, and before the baby that was not yet born, and I would go down in the dark and start the stove, and I would think, if I can only stay ahead of it, if I can only keep the house one step in front of them, then no one will have anything to say. But you cannot stay ahead of a thing you cannot see, and I could not yet see it. I had no name for what was gathering. I only kept running. The baby came in the spring, in the upstairs room, with the midwife and my mother, and no doctor and no hospital, because that is not our way, and never has been. It was long and it was hard, and for days after, I could not stand at the sink without holding the edge of it. There is no leave given for this. There is no nurse who comes. There is your mother for a few days, and then there is your own 2 feet, whether they will hold you or not. And 10 days after, the very Tuesday I told you of at the start, the visits began again, as though nothing at all had happened to my body, as though a wife were a thing that did not need mending. 2 women came that morning after the bishop's wife, come to see the Bopley and to help, they said. And my wash was not out. It was still heaped in the basket by the door, because I had been up in the night with him 3 times and had not the strength yet to carry it. And there was a moment, standing there, when my knees would not hold me 1 minute more, and I sat down. I sat down in my own kitchen while guests were still in it, and I saw the 2 of them look at each other. Nothing was said, but the silence had a weight to it, a shape, and I knew I had just been seen doing a thing a good wife does not do. If you are listening to this, and you have ever sat down in your own house and felt the room go quiet around you for it, stay with me a while. If my telling means something to you, follow along so it can find you again, and leave a word below, even just the name of the place you're listening from. It helps these quiet stories reach the other women who need them, and it tells me I am not speaking into an empty room. Because that day, sitting there, I still believed the trouble was only mine, that I was simply weak, simply behind. I did not yet know that anyone was writing it down. 6 weeks after he was born, it fell to us to host the G-May. Our turn had come round on the list, the way it comes to every house, and there is no asking to be passed over. You do not tell the church you are too tired. The benches came by wagon the day before, and I cleaned as I have never cleaned, on my knees on floors that had only just stopped spinning under me, and I baked what I could through the nights when the baby let me. Church morning came, and the buggies filled the lane, and the district folded into my house, the men to their side, the women to theirs, the singing slow and long and without any instrument, the way it has always been, and I got through the service. It was after, in the serving, that I failed. There was not enough. I had made too little bread, and the pies ran short, and the coffee gave out before the last table was served, and I saw the women moving quiet in my kitchen, making do, stretching what there was, saying nothing to me and everything to each other with their hands. And then, God forgive me, in the middle of it, I went to the back room to nurse him, and I sat down on the edge of the bed, and I did not come back. I fell asleep sitting up, with my baby at my breast, while the benches still stood unstacked and the last women were still washing my cups. They found me there. No one scolded me. That was the worst of it. No one ever scolded me. They only looked, and they carried it home. When the last buggy had gone down the lane and Amos was out at the barn, I put the baby in the sling my mother made me, and I walked. I did not decide where. My feet took me down the road, past the schoolhouse, to the little gross dotty house at the end where old Ruth lived, the oldest widow in our district, because there was nowhere else to carry what I was carrying, and because Ruth had buried a husband and raised 9, and was long past being afraid of anyone. I knocked, and I stood on her step in the last of the light, and when she opened the door and saw my face, she did not ask me what was wrong. She only stepped back and held the door wide and said, "Come in out of the evening, before you take a chill." She sat me at her table, in a kitchen that smelled of dried mint and lamp oil, and she poured coffee I did not have to earn, and she let me talk myself empty. I told her about the wash, and the sitting down, and the church I had not fed, and how I could not seem to stay ahead of any of it. And Ruth listened, with her old hands folded, and when I had finished she was quiet a long while. Then she said, "Louie, dear one, do you not know what it is they are doing?" I said I did not, and she told me. She told me that the visits carry back, that when a young wife is married in, the women watch her, and what they see does not stay with them. It goes back, quiet, to the bishop's wife, who holds the standing of all the women of the district, that there has always been an accounting of the new wives, not on paper, not a thing you could ever hold in your hand or point to, but kept all the same, added up, remembered, who kept her line full on Mondays, who came back on her feet after her babies, who fed the church well when her turn came. And she looked at me across the table and she said, "You have been marked twice now, May kind, the wash, and the G-May you could not feed." And then she leaned close and asked me a question of her own, the one I have never once forgotten. She said, "In all of that counting, child, in all the marking and the carrying back, did the bishop ever once come to your door and ask you the only question worth the asking? Did he ask, 'Is she well? Has her body healed? Does she sleep at night? Or does she weep in the mornings over a windowsill?'" And I sat there, and I could not answer her, because the answer was no. No one had asked me that. Not the bishop, who holds the standing of every woman in the district. Not the doctor, who was never once called to my bed, because a doctor is not our way. Not one living soul in 2 years of marriage had thought to ask me whether I was well. And Ruth nodded, slow, as though she had known my answer before ever I gave it. "That," she said, "is the question. That is the question the pencil never writes down. They will count your Monday line and your church bread until the day they lay you in the ground, and not one of them will ever think to ask if you are well." And then she asked me the softer thing, the thing I have carried longest. She said, "And who did you believe held the pencil, child?" I had no answer. I had never once thought there was a pencil at all. And Ruth reached across and took my hand, and she said, "I failed it 3 times the year my first was born. 3 times. And I am an old woman still here, and the Lord has not held one of the 3 against me." She said, "We left school at the 8th grade, all of us, and no one ever wrote down this lesson, so we pass it hand to hand, in the dark, too late." She was not bitter when she said it. That was the thing. She said it the way you'd hand a girl a shawl on a cold night. I walked home in the dark with the baby warm against me, and something in me had gone very quiet and very clear. That night I asked Amos, straight out, "Did you know? Did you know there was an accounting kept of me?" And he was a long time answering, and then he said, yes. He had known since we were married. His mother had told him, the way the men are told, and he had said nothing, because that too is the way. You do not speak of it, you only live under it. I was not angry the way you might think. I was tired, and I was sad for him, that he had carried it silent all that time, and thought that was kindness. And then I made a decision, in my own heart, that no one voted on, and no one blessed. I decided I would keep my house for God and for that baby, and not for the ledger. Not for the pencil. I still hung my wash. I still fed the church when my turn came round again, and fed it well, because that is love, and not only law. But I stopped running. I stopped waking in the dark with my chest tight over a windowsill. And one Monday not long after, when I was bone-tired and the baby was cutting a tooth, I left the wash in the basket. I let Monday pass, and Tuesday come, and I hung it out on the Tuesday in the full sight of the road, white and plain, and I did not once go to the window to see who saw. I had never done such a thing in my life. It was a small thing, a line of wash a day late, but it was the first thing in my married life I had done for no one's eyes but the Lord's, and mine, and the boys asleep in the next room. And nothing happened. The sky did not fall. The buggies went past, and the wash dried, and I was still a wife, and still a mother, and still, somehow, myself. It felt like standing up straight after years of stooping under a low beam. So I want to say something to you, whoever you are, listening to an old story in your own quiet kitchen. If there has been a pencil kept on you, and there has been, in one district or another, in one form or another, for most of us, I want you to hear this. You were never the sum of a windowsill. You were never the count of your rows, or the whiteness of your Monday line, or how soon you stood back up after you gave life. The women who measured me were measured once themselves, by women who were measured before them, and every one of them was somebody's frightened girl who only wanted to be found good. There is no villain in this. There is only a long line of tired women handing fear down the way you'd hand down a recipe, because no one ever told them they were allowed to set it down. The bishop's wife who ran her finger along my sill, she was grated too once, harder than I ever was. I have come to hold her gently in my mind, and Ruth, who is with the Lord now, gave me the only real inheritance I have, not the mark, but the knowing that the mark was never the truth of me. For years I could not say what was wrong. I did not have a word for it. I have a word for it now. It was scorekeeping, in a house that was meant for grace. And grace does not keep score. You are not behind. You were never behind. You were only ever a woman doing holy work with tired hands, and that has always been enough, and it is enough still. I wrote it all down, the whole of it, the parts that would not fit in the telling here, the years and the names and the things Ruth said to me that I have kept close all this time. It is there for you, if you would like to sit with it a while longer. You will find it in the first pinned comment, just below. Thank you for staying with me and for listening the way you did. Go gently this week. Keep your house for the ones you love, and never once for the pencil. And come back and sit with me again when you can.